I was always looking for an answer, and I would be hungover in bed on a Sunday morning, scouring the internet, alternatives to AA or how to help with alcohol cravings or how to quit drinking. And one day I stumbled on this TEDx talk called How I Overcame Alcoholism by Claudia Christian. And she talked about in this TEDx talk her experience using a treatment protocol known as the Sinclair Method, which essentially she describes how she would take a medication called Naltrexone before drinking. So it wasn't an abstinence-based treatment, but by taking this medicine before drinking, she explained how it just helped her essentially regain her control back over alcohol and become less interested in alcohol. And she was still drinking, but it wasn't from a compulsive, chronic, heavy space. It was more just socially enjoying wine and things like that.
Still having a period, but you're feeling out of whack and you suspect your hormones might be playing tricks on you? It's time to get the lowdown on estrogen dominance with my free ebook. It is the no-nonsense guide to understanding estrogen dominance, how it contributes to pesky weight gain, abnormal, heavy, or painful periods, fibroids, and more. Say goodbye to the guesswork and hello to clarity. Dash on over to ed.hormoneshelp.com, grab your free copy, and get started on your journey to better health. Your body will thank you. Welcome back to Menopause Mastery. So today we're going to talk with my friend Katie Lain about drinking, and specifically about the slippery slope where drinking becomes a problem, and the most successful treatment, which is actually 70% to 80% successful. And it's a treatment you've never heard of. Now, you may be listening to this, and before you jump off this podcast and you think, well, I don't have a drinking problem. Well, I'd hate to break it to you. There was a 41% increase in heavy drinking among women over the last several years. And even a study published last year looking at moderate drinkers over age 30, they saw binge drinking on the weekend, defined as 5 or more drinks in a row within a short period of time, increasing more in women than in men. And if we look at the statistics, we know also that drinking alcohol is a greater risk for things like breast cancer, cardiovascular disease, and dementia than any other lifestyle behavior other than obesity. Now, what's really interesting too is if we look at the situation of risk for hormone replacement and breast cancer, which I hear about all the time, and if you listen to my podcast, you know that women are terrified of doing hormone replacement or concerned or questioning hormone replacement because of the Women's Health Initiative and whether, we have an increased risk for breast cancer or not. But the simple fact is, consuming alcohol on a daily basis or significant amounts of alcohol, which would be basically 1 ounce of grain alcohol or 6 ounces of wine a day, which is considered moderation, which I would say drinking in moderation has no health benefits. That has been completely debunked. But the simple fact is, if you're drinking more than that, your risk for breast cancer is by far greater than if you had done any hormone replacement, regardless of type. But women don't get concerned about that. We aren't concerned about the wine that we drink at night and what it may be doing for our long-term risks. It's even like loss of brain mass, which is associated with Alzheimer's and dementia. Alcohol is a big driver of loss of brain mass. So this is a conversation for you. Even if you don't have an issue with drinking, you don't feel like you have an issue with drinking, I want you to know this method. So if you get to the point where you feel like you need to cut back or change what you're doing, this is the method I would recommend because it has a 70 to 80% success rate, whereas the current abstinence, AA, and in-office or in-house treatment has a 70 to 80% failure rate in the United States. So listen to the Menopause Mastery while I talk to my friend Katie Lain. Oh, Katie, it's a weird thing to say I'm excited to talk to you about a problem that is epidemic, but I am excited to talk about our topic today because I think there's just a better method. And I think we're going to talk about the better method of controlling alcohol and stopping alcohol compared to what is commonly used in the US. I'd love for you to share your own personal story because I think it's in the personal stories that people relate. We always feel like we're the only ones going through things. And it's like, no, a lot of us have very shared experiences.
Yeah, well, I'm so grateful to have a chance to share this information with you, Betty. So thank you for having me on. And just briefly, so I personally struggled with alcohol for nearly 10 years. I prefer the medical term alcohol use disorder, but if, people are used to the term alcoholic, that was definitely me for nearly 10 years, where it was interesting when I started drinking, I didn't really care about alcohol. I could easily control how much I drank. I could go days or weeks without drinking or thinking about drinking. But progressively over time, what happened is I developed an alcohol use disorder, and I quickly, I would say within the matter of a year, became a daily binge drinker. And so I was basically drinking to intoxication or passing out or blacking out nearly 7 days a week. It was hard for me to even have one alcohol-free day each week. And a part of me loved it because I loved to socialize and go to happy hour. And I just felt like getting buzzed was like a way to feel free and, all of that. But then there was always like this very dark side to my drinking when it would escalate and I would do and say things I regretted, and I would wake up feeling hungover the next day, all of the negative consequences. So I was really in this place where I feel like I was conflicted internally with what to do about my drinking. I knew I couldn't control it because I tried to moderate so many times. Like I'd be like, I'm going to save it for the weekends. I'm going to have just 2 glasses of wine tonight. All of these rules that many people can probably relate to. And I'd almost fail them, or I'd fail them most of the time. I would say I'd have the good intention, but I wouldn't follow through. So I couldn't moderate. And then I would try to quit drinking also. And I couldn't stay quit because I would just start obsessively thinking about drinking and craving alcohol. And before I knew it, my willpower would burn out and I would say, screw it. I had a stressful day. I'm going to go get that bottle of wine at the store. And so my drinking just continued to get worse the longer I was struggling with it. I just really felt like I couldn't find a solution. And deep down, honestly, I wasn't in a place where I wanted to quit drinking and never touch alcohol again. I wanted to find a way to moderate, but I just kept failing at it. And to your point, kind of what you said at the beginning, it's something I struggled with very secretly. But since coming out with my story the last 7+ years, I've realized that there's so many people out there just like me who are stuck in this unhealthy relationship with alcohol. Yes, still functioning, but feeling very isolated and alone in the struggle.
Yeah. Especially I'm a little bit older than you and well, quite a bit older probably. But the reality is especially I'd say the 40+ age range, This is sport. Going out for drinks, eating and drinking out, having a glass of wine at dinner. I mean, it is romanticized in this environment. And I think, a lot of us probably, I'm a kid of the 80s. I'm Gen X, we probably didn't necessarily invent binge drinking as teens, but we definitely put some hammer down, in teens and 20s. And I think it starts out as you can take it or leave it. And I think everybody thinks that's somebody else, that's going to happen to somebody else, that I'm going to be the one that I can have a glass of wine and put it down, and that I'm not going to be on this slippery slope, where I devolve into I have to have a half a bottle to a bottle of wine every night to unwind. And then it becomes habitual. And I think that's where a lot of women get stuck and they don't realize it.
Yeah. And to your point, it's like, or I would be like, well, my drinking isn't as bad as that person, so I must still be okay. Or I still have my job, my marriage, it's not that bad, but I could just see the trajectory I was heading down. It was getting worse and worse every year. And and it was so to your point about it just being so ingrained in our culture, it was something where, it was acceptable to have it after a 5K run I would do, or going out with friends. It was everything revolved around that. I had an invitation to drink every single day. And like I said, it was fun. The first couple of drinks were fun, friends and whatnot, but then it always went over into this dark side as well. And I ended up isolating and drinking more at home alone so I could drink as much as I wanted to, and drinking and driving and things like that. So, yeah.
Yeah, that drinking and driving, you brought up a really interesting thing. I was looking at some stats before we got on. There was a study that came out of the UK, and it was pretty sobering. They found there was over 14 times as many alcohol attributable deaths in the UK among 70 to 74-year-olds compared to the young adult. That stopped me in my tracks. I'm like, oh my God. So this is the person, now granted it's a 70, 74-year-old, but I have people of all age groups listening to my podcast that we would say are, probably slowing down, probably not, they're not binge drinking in the pub, as a 20-year-old. That is so scary. That's the elephant in the room because it is a progressive problem. Now, what I'd love to talk about is there's different methods, and the failure rate, depending on where you look at the United States trajectory on failing, alcohol use disorder treatment is epic. It's 67 to about 80% failure rate, depending on what study. I would say you probably know more about that than I do.
No, that's true. There's one study says 80% or more of people will relapse within 6 months of leaving treatment.
Yeah, so it's this really, so depending on what you choose, you might go inpatient and go to this really expensive treatment center and go through abuse training and psychological cognitive behavior therapy and usually, drug intervention with either like a long-term use of Naltrexone every day or an abuse or something like that. But it's got this epic failure rate. Like if you did an investment that had 80% failure rate, it would not be an investment anymore. Now I want you to talk about the method that works, and then I'll talk about my experience of how I found it and how I found you.
Yeah. And just to, piggyback on what you were saying, like the failure rate, I literally tried to quit drinking dozens of times over a course of a 10-year period. I'd wake up really hungover or just be like in a really toxic cycle with drinking and say, this is it, I'm quitting. And I would genuinely mean it. And I'd be like, this is a fresh start. I'm throwing out all the alcohol. I'm not going to drink again. But then inevitably I would return to it again within a few days, a few weeks. I made it 6 months one time, but it was white knuckled the whole time. In the back of my mind, I was like, is my willpower going to burn out eventually? Like I'm probably going to drink again one day because I don't know if I can go the rest of my life just like resisting this urge to drink. And so I was definitely part of that failure. And what's sad is that those treatments unintentionally or intentionally, I don't know, they kind of blame the individual. Like, well, it's your fault. You're not really ready. You don't really, take this treatment seriously. It works if you work it kind of thing. And I think that it's true. We have to have a desire to change with anything, whether it's alcohol or weight loss or whatever. But if someone's using a treatment that has an 80+% failure rate, it's like odds are they're going to fail the treatment. So anyway, that kind of leads me into how I finally got free from my alcohol dependence. So I was always looking for an answer, and I would like be hungover in bed on a Sunday morning, scouring the internet, like alternatives to AA or how to help with alcohol cravings or how to quit drinking. And one day I stumbled on this TEDx talk, which is now viral. And I think it has nearly 5 million views. It's called How I Overcame Alcoholism by Claudia Christian. She's an actress. Many people know her from a lot of the sci-fi work she did in like the 80s and the 90s. And she talked about in this TEDx talk her experience using a treatment protocol known as the Sinclair Method, which essentially she describes how she would take a medication called Naltrexone before drinking. So it wasn't an abstinence-based treatment, but by taking this medicine before drinking, she explained how it just helped her essentially regain her control back over alcohol and become less interested in alcohol. And she was still drinking, but it wasn't from a compulsive, chronic, heavy space. It was more just like socially enjoying wine and things like that. And so when I learned about this treatment, first, I thought it was too good to be true because I'm like, I've been trying this for years and never heard of this before. Why haven't I heard of it? But something in me just knew I had to try it because I was like, is this the answer I'd been like searching for years and years? And so it led me to getting the medication, which back in 2017 was not very easy because even though this medicine, it's generic, it's non-addictive, it's cheap, it's been approved for alcohol by the FDA since 1994, even though and there's tons of research out there about how it helps people drink less alcohol, some doctors won't prescribe it. So I struggled to get a prescription when I first learned about it. I went to several doctors. They all told me no. But I finally did find a doctor to prescribe it who specialized in the treatment. And man, it was life-changing. Like, I'm not kidding when I tell you before this treatment, I tried to moderate or quit so many times and just failed. It was difficult. It was this strenuous effort that just wasn't worth it. And I'd say, screw it, I'm just going to drink how I want to drink. But with this treatment, within the first week on it, so I was taking Naltrexone, waiting 1 hour and drinking. And again, I was a daily drinker. So I was pretty much drinking still 7 days a week. And my doctor even said, try to drink every day for the next 30 days. And again, she specialized in the treatment. So she knew what she was talking about. And I was like, yes, I get a drink. Like my doctor's telling me to as part of this treatment. But in the first week on it, I had an alcohol-free day simply because I didn't feel like drinking. And this was like such a stark contrast to what my alcohol-free days were like before, where it was just like, I better not drink today. I've been drinking for like 2 months straight. I need to have an alcohol-free day. And I would just like white knuckle it and force it. But it was different. I just didn't feel like drinking. And the longer I was on the treatment, the results were gradual, but they were progressive, they were continuous, and they were super encouraging to where from the moment I started the treatment, I never blacked out again. I was still drinking quite a bit, but I was coherent. I wasn't blacking out anymore. I was having more alcohol-free days. And when I was drinking, I was someone who could easily drink at least a bottle of wine a night. I would usually pull from like a whiskey I had stashed away to hide it from my husband. 2 bottles of wine, no problem. Like if I could drink freely without having to hide it. And I just gradually reduced to where I couldn't even finish a bottle of wine anymore. And then I could only drink 2 glasses and then 1 glass. And over the course of, I was on the treatment for a year, my drinking went from basically daily binge drinking, no control over alcohol, to after about a year on the treatment, I was drinking like once or twice a month, 1 or 2 glasses of wine at dinner with friends. I was no longer drinking home alone. I wasn't drinking to get drunk. I was drinking because, I was having Italian dinner. A glass of wine sounds good, but I'd feel satisfied and I'd be able to stop at that.
Yeah, I think so. I'm very much like, can we do things with diet and lifestyle? But the reality is, I'm sure some women are probably listening to this, and probably the few men that listen. Thank you for listening, guys. They're probably thinking, oh, this will never happen to me. I won't ever have this kind of problem. But the reality is, alcohol, unlike every other chemical drug you can take, creates receptors on every single cell of your body. You could get off heroin. You're going to wish you were dead coming off heroin, probably. I've never done it, but I would think going through the detox of heroin's pretty bad, but you wouldn't die from it. You could die from actually withdrawing alcohol too quickly because of the impact biochemically and cellularly. So a lot of people that start out, they're adding just a little bit and they don't realize that they have this progressive consumption like you experienced. Yeah. So for anybody that hadn't heard the Sinclair Method, it has a 70 to 80% success rate in extinction. Right? So explain extinction, because I don't think people understand that, because that is different than stopping.
Yeah, it is. And it's crazy that the success rate of this treatment is the failure rate of abstinence-based treatments, but it really is. And there's been tons of clinical trials done for decades. This has been researched since the 90s. It's just wildly unknown. So extinction, or pharmacological extinction through the Sinclair Method, essentially means that the alcohol use disorder has been reversed neurologically in the brain. And when that happens, a lot of people will get back to the place they were in with regards to their relationship with alcohol before they had an alcohol use disorder. So, for me, I mentioned when I first started drinking, I had this control. I didn't really care about it. I could go days or weeks without drinking, no big deal. And that's where I got back to when I reached extinction, which I was on the protocol for a year. So I was drinking for a year, taking Naltrexone before and drinking. But I reached extinction at about 8 months. And that's defined as essentially in layman's terms, like a sense of regained control over alcohol consistently, where you're probably mostly alcohol free. But when you drink, you have a couple drinks, call it a night. That's it. And so someone gets to this place of extinction. Usually the quickest I've seen is about 3 months. Others, it can take a year or more. I was about an average case, 8 to 9 months. But again, essentially the alcohol use disorder gets reversed in the brain. And I think that's something that I knew I didn't understand when I was struggling with alcohol. I really just thought I was a weak-willed person and I was really relying on alcohol to cope. And I didn't have enough discipline. It was all on my shoulders. What I didn't realize is that the alcohol, by repeatedly drinking alcohol, kind of innocently, oh, this is what we do. We have wine, with friends or to unwind at the end of the day or whatever. Not realizing that by repeatedly drinking and also drinking to excess, I was changing my brain and causing this addiction to really set into my brain. And so that's really something that I think is empowering to know that when we have an addiction, it's kind of hijacked our brain. And when we go on the Sinclair Method, it reverses that. And really, it feels like, for me, alcohol just became so unimportant. I didn't crave it. I didn't think about it anymore. It just became something that, like I said, I would drink it on occasion, but never to excess. And usually I didn't even want it. And so David Sinclair, who discovered the Sinclair Method, that's why it's called that, he realized that if someone can repeatedly drink on naltrexone, and by the way, I don't think I've talked about why naltrexone works. It's essentially blocking some of the rewarding effects of alcohol. The reason alcohol is addictive, because it floods our brain with all these feel-good hormones. And so when someone drinks on naltrexone, it just makes it a little bit less interesting and a little bit less exciting. I was not really chasing the buzz as much. I could sit and savor my drink and not be worried oh, where's the second or third, or I need more alcohol or something like that. So naltrexone, when I was drinking on it, it slowed me down a bit, and it didn't make drinking an unpleasurable experience. It just made it less interesting. 1 or 2 drinks, I'd be nah, I'm good. I don't need more than that. Whereas before it, I would be chasing the buzz all night long. So through drinking on naltrexone repeatedly over several months, David Sinclair showed that the addiction could essentially be reversed from the brain. And when that happens, people can either go alcohol-free because they just kind of lose interest in alcohol and don't really have the desire to drink. Others can keep alcohol in their life and drink in moderation because their brain has been fixed essentially, and they have this control back over alcohol. So that's really cool about this treatment. The person can set their goals. They don't have to go abstinent forever, or, they can decide. Like, I know people who drink once or twice a year on holidays or birthdays or things like that, others who drink on the weekends, others who drink once a month. Like, it's up to the person to decide like what role they want alcohol to play once they reach extinction of the addiction.
Yeah. And so for everybody that's kind of going, oh, what do they mean? How does that work? Yeah. So when we're talking about extinction, every time you do a behavior, right? And especially something we like. So it could be drinking alcohol. It could be shopping for shoes, whatever your story is. We get this burst of dopamine. We get a little bit of serotonin. So every time we keep doing that activity, you keep reinforcing this kind of neural pathway. So think of it as it starts out as a dirt road, then becomes a road, and then a highway. And so when you take Naltrexone, what that does is block that opiate dopamine receptor. So it doesn't click in as strongly. It doesn't block it completely, but it basically does that. So then the superhighway goes to a road, then back to a dirt road, and then narrows down. What is different about this than the way we do it in the United States is you only take the Naltrexone in the Sinclair Method when you're drinking. You don't take it every morning, because the other thing that I think happens, and I've talked to a lot of people that have struggled with alcohol, gone through alcohol recovery, and tried, what's common here, which is complete abstinence with Naltrexone. And when you give that all the time, you also don't get a dopamine boost from your exercise. And from the other things you enjoy, everything gets blunted. So I think then you start willpowering and white knuckling it. Whereas the Sinclair Method, you literally go, okay, I'm going to drink in an hour or so. I'm going to go ahead and take my Naltrexone only right now, and then I'm going to go do the behavior, which then takes the brain and says, oh, this drink that I'm drinking is no longer affecting the dopamine pathway, so now it's released. That distinction is so important. So very important. I mean, I had somebody that is very close to me. He's already shared his message online. My husband, who, started out just drinking a little bit, and he's a firefighter, paramedic, so if there was one group of people that are just immersed in alcohol, it would be that group. And then it started becoming every day when he wasn't at work, and, obviously went to work sober every day, but that became a coping mechanism. Yeah. And it was through the Sinclair Method that he was able to stop drinking. And his original intent was to just calm it down, right?
Same for me. Yeah.
Yeah. And then he was like, no, now I just need to extinct it. And to feel empowered in that way, where you're not white knuckling every day, I think is just huge.
Yeah, your husband's story is powerful. It's on our YouTube channel. And so I'm very grateful he came on to share that. And a lot of people, kind of what happened to him and what happened to me is we start the treatment. We have the goal to drink moderately. We actually do so successfully, usually, like over time with the method. But it's amazing what happens. And it's almost hard to even describe to someone who's struggling with alcohol. Like, you get to, or at least I got to a place where it was like, I just really didn't care about alcohol, to the point where I preferred bringing coconut water to a party or sparkling water. Like, the thought of drinking was like, no, that just doesn't sound good. And I was someone who I was down to drink morning, noon, night, 7 days a week. And so to be in that place where I was like choosing not to drink, I could if I wanted to, but I just didn't want to, was like a completely different experience. And I don't drink anymore today, but I'm always like, maybe I'll drink one day. I don't know. My husband's from France and we go visit a family. Maybe I'll have some alcohol at some point. I love that I have the option, but I just honestly, like, it kind of grosses me out now. I don't really enjoy it. I don't like the buzz. So I just don't drink.
Yeah, I think here's the other thing that really bugs me, Katie, is Naltrexone, which blocks dopamine, right? So basically, if you took it and did heroin, you wouldn't have the same effect as heroin, right?
Yeah.
But they classify it in such a way that makes it really difficult to get. It's a classified drug, which is stupid. Like, we will have Narcan at a CVS today or a drugstore where you could just buy it over the counter in case you have somebody ODing, but we won't allow people to have easy access to Naltrexone to help moderate and reduce their alcohol use disorder. Like you said, you went through so much trouble to get it.
Yeah, I did. And a lot of people do. And there was a recent article last year in the New York Times. It's called like binge drinking may be curbed by a pill. So it talks about a recent study on Naltrexone, like following the Sinclair Method, though they didn't call it that. And in there, it quotes a doctor. Her name's Dr. Katie Lain, and she works in addiction medicine. I forget at which university, I think one in Arizona, but she basically talked about how there's this major disconnect between what's happening in the research world and what's happening in the treatment world. And she references a client who she wanted to get going on Naltrexone. They went to their doctor and the doctor refused a prescription, thinking, oh, I need to be a specialist in order to prescribe this. Or doctors will just simply be unwilling to prescribe it. Like my experience, you need to go to AA and detox first, and then maybe we'll give you the medicine. That's kind of what I heard, which is just insane. Because if you look at all the research, there's so much that's been done about drinking on naltrexone and how it's a safe drug. It's non-addictive. It's generic. So it's super cheap. It should be like, I mean, you read articles from doctors. This should be frontline treatment. It's been researched for decades, but it's simply not. And it's I was so ashamed when I finally like went to a doctor for help and they all told me no. I was like, this feels like really inhumane that I like need this medicine to reduce my drinking and you are refusing it. It was just crazy. And sadly, this has changed a little bit in the last 7 years, but it's still kind of the same story.
Now, as somebody that's obviously been in women's health for a long time, we view alcohol use, right, where people start, I'm just to say teetering on, I'm no longer 100% in control, much like we look at weight and obesity. It's you're slovenly, you're lazy, you don't have willpower. It's your moral failing when it's everything farther than from that. And because of that, and especially in the medical community, I'm pretty brutal about the medical community. I have the right to do that because I'm in it. And the higher and holier than thou behavior of physicians to play that game it's just, if you have a doctor that acts like that to you, fire them like yesterday. Like they don't deserve to be that way. There's nothing special. They went to school a little bit longer, but the simple fact is they're supposed to be there to help you. And it is super frustrating. We do the Sinclair Method at my clinic, and it was because I found that documentary, One Little Pill. And it was, it was that. I was like, oh my gosh, honey, we need to look at this. This is amazing. Why aren't we doing this? I think, Katie, and I bet you've probably heard a lot of this over these last 7 years. I think it's because there's so much money being made by alcohol treatment that fails.
Yeah. They count on people relapsing. I've gone to several addiction conferences, and 99.9% of the people there are just repackaged versions of different rehab centers promoting 12 steps in AA. And my dad is sober through AA, so I never ever knock it. But it's like the only option offered to people. And so many people come to TSM. One of our coaches that works with us, she was in and out of AA for 20 years and she kept relapsing, but she kept going back thinking this is the only option, but she relapsed more times than, we can even count. And so I agree. Even at one of the addiction conferences, one of the physicians got on the stage, not physicians, presenters. And he said something like, we all know addiction treatment doesn't work. And he was like kind of joking, but kind of serious. And it was like, well, then what are we doing here? And it's funny going to these conferences trying to talk about the Sinclair Method. They're like, oh, okay. Like they hear it and they're not like mean about it, but they don't care. They're just going to keep doing what's, a multi-billion-dollar industry, making them tons of money. They count on people relapsing. I think the statistic is like around 6 times people relapse. So they know if it's their first time, they're probably going to be back multiple more times before it finally sticks, or maybe it'll never stick, but yeah.
And then what is it for treatment? It's probably anywhere from the low end, $10,000 a week to 20 or 30. Like it is, and it's not covered. It's not like, your healthcare insurance does not care. So it's all this out of pocket. Yeah. And I think it's the industrial money, because the simple fact is even if they did the Sinclair Method within a treatment facility, it would be so much more effective.
Yeah, it would be. It's crazy to me that it's not more well known, but it's all abstinence based. I even, again, referencing one of these conferences, I met an addiction specialist who's been in the field for decades. He's like in his 70s now, considered like, the top dog in his field. And he's like, we've known about naltrexone since the 80s. And I was like, well, why isn't it more well known? And he goes, abstinence is best. Like that was like his plain and simple statement. But for me, what I feel, my perspective is what doctors don't understand is the craving issue, because logically, yes, abstinence is probably the safest, and it makes the most sense. It's the easiest to measure. But what I feel like was completely not talked about and ignored in my years of struggle is that mental preoccupation with drinking and the thinking about it and I can't drink today. I can't drink today. Or I've had people reach out to me. I'm 2 years sober and I still think about drinking every day. That is something that is not talked about as much as it should be, because that is I believe the reason why so many people relapse, because there's this again, the brain is hijacked by the addiction, which is what the Sinclair Method works to reverse. But if someone's thinking about drinking and wanting to drink every day and they're just resisting that urge, eventually the willpower is going to burn out, which is why 80% of more people end up relapsing. And that's something that I think is really ignored in these treatment centers that are just like, okay, stop and now kind of do the work and figure out why you've been drinking for so long. And I honestly work with a lot of people who go through the Sinclair Method, and they'll tell me like, yeah, I started drinking 10 years ago when I went through a divorce, but I'm over that. That's not why I drink now. I drink because like I'm bored, or it's what I do, or again, I'm craving it. So there's not always this like trauma that like you have to uncover and get to the bottom of. Yes, it is for some people, but I drank when I was happy, when I was sad, when I was bored, when I was lonely, like it wasn't just this one thing that happened in my life that keeps me drinking in that way. It was because my brain had become addicted, plain and simple.
Yeah. Yeah. And like we were talking about earlier, it's those dopamine receptors, and the drive for it is not just a thought drive.
No.
It is a biochemical. Every single cell is screaming for it. And it takes over 7 days for alcohol to clear your system. So some people might go, okay, maybe I can just make it through the week. Well, you still haven't recovered from that last drink. It's still resident in your body. So, the simple fact is the craving isn't just, okay, I want to do this or not. It's a biochemical thing. And I think it's just a travesty that we ignore that process.
And if people want to look into this more, I'm sure you're aware of the alcohol deprivation effect, which was part of David Sinclair's research. There's been a lot of research into this. You can search on Google, alcohol deprivation effect research. And what he showed in his studies with rats, and it's the same with humans, that if someone is addicted to alcohol and then it's abruptly removed, they actually go into a deprivation period. And when that happens, the craving for alcohol increases, the motivation increases. And in the studies with the rats, when alcohol was reintroduced, they binge drank at a rate 15 times more than what they were drinking before. And so many people, when they learn about the Sinclair method, this is what clicks for them, because they're like, no wonder why when I was like 3 months sober, I was thinking about alcohol more than I ever was before. And when I finally drank again, I had like 3 bottles of wine. This has been research. It's not that you're weak-willed and you're giving in to the urge. There's actually something that happens where your brain, like you said, every cell is screaming for it. Your brain is equating this substance to almost like a survival need. And so when you don't have it, the longer you go without it, the more you're like, oh my gosh, I need to get a drink. So that makes sense to a lot of people. And it was kind of a cornerstone of David Sinclair's research. Like, how can we avoid that deprivation period and help people get free from the addiction?
Yeah. And even the guy whose name was Bill Wilson, even the guy who created AA said, until we have a medical treatment that's more effective, AA is an answer. And I think for some people is an answer. I will say for me, like if I were in that position, I don't like the word I am a victim to, or I have to submit to my weakness. Yeah. Like that makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up, because I don't relate to that. Yeah. Right. Yes. If I was somebody that had a drinking disorder, I might be a little bit of a slave to some degree to that disorder, but it's not because I'm weak. And so I think a lot of people also get stuck where that's the only answer they're given, and it doesn't connect with them. Right. Yeah. It doesn't connect deep down. It feels disempowering.
Yeah, exactly. And that label of, hi, my name's so-and-so, I'm an alcoholic, like that's your identity that you put on yourself for the rest of your life as part of AA. Like you're never recovered from it. And it's funny because, I advocate for this treatment online. I make a lot of videos, and just for like layman's terms, I'm like, I'm a former alcoholic. Like I just said that in a video to kind of introduce myself. And you wouldn't believe the anger I got in the comments of like, there's no such thing as a former alcoholic. You're an alcoholic forever. And I honestly feel like through the Sinclair method, like it's behind me. Like it's not an issue anymore. I'm not tempted. My husband still drinks. He's never had a problem with it, but he could be drinking like a really nice wine right in front of me. And I'm like, no emotion, no desire. I really feel cured or healed or recovered. But with, the AA model, it's like you're an alcoholic for the rest of your life. And I think that's helpful for some to like believe that and then put on that identity. And therefore, this is why I can't drink, because this is who I am. If that works, I'm not going to say it doesn't for that person. But what you said, it's so disempowering. I would say most who go on the Sinclair method, they much prefer the term alcohol use disorder, which is the clinical term. People can exist on a spectrum from mild, moderate to severe. And if someone's like a mild alcohol use disorder, they drink 4 glasses of wine every night, but like they can't really go a night without it, that's not too severe. But to that person, to tell them they're an alcoholic and they've got to go to AA every day, that just like doesn't click. It doesn't make sense. It's like, no, I'm not. But maybe in 10, 20 years, they might be the alcoholic or whatever. But that term is just very stigmatized and I think unhelpful for a lot of people.
Well, and I think, you brought up a really good point. The public vision, I think, of somebody that has alcohol use disorder or alcoholic with, air quotes around it, is the person who binge drinks an entire bottle of whiskey on a Friday night and does it Saturday and Sunday and then drinks maintenance drinks throughout the week, and that they're disheveled, can't hold a job down, can't do. And that's not true. I would say if I had $1 for every woman that came into my office and says, you know what, when I'm prepping dinner every night, I have a glass of wine. And I'm like, do you have to have it? They're like, well, it helps me unwind. Like that's how it starts, right? And then it's a glass with dinner. And then once the kids go to bed, and they get their free time while they're on YouTube and everything else, they have another glass. What we see is this extraordinary increase in drinking in women statistically, particularly post-COVID, but it was already going, right? Especially wine drinking. Wine drinking has surpassed all other alcohol consumption in the United States in the last decade or so because they're targeting women, right? We are being targeted. That's why we have what is it? Oh yeah, they're like, we'll get girls drinking and we'll keep you drinking, right? Because it's a girly drink, right? I might feel like I'm a little driven, like I shouldn't drink as much, but I keep doing it. Yeah. Right. And I think that's that slippery slope that we don't realize. Maybe we never slide into that. I lose my job and I can't function and all that other stuff, but I might constantly be driven to drink.
Yeah, exactly. And that's something I hear from a lot of women I've worked with. Well, they'll say, it started as like a glass or two of wine with dinner. And then I would use it with cooking dinner. And then after the kids go to bed, and they're like, I'm not really sure where it went from, normal low risk drinking to now I'm drinking one bottle and I'm opening up the second. It is this slippery slope. And yeah, I think the majority of people I've worked with, of course, there are severe cases of alcohol use disorder as well that can respond to the Sinclair method. But there's just a huge number of people out there that are, the gray area drinker, I guess is the term that's used a lot, where yes, they're drinking too much. They're on the alcohol use disorder spectrum, but they're still working. They're still taking care of their kids. Maybe they're a little hungover every day and, not feeling their best, but they're still functioning in life. And so for those people, and I think a lot of them, this was true for me, the idea of never drinking again, I was like, that's terrifying. Like, I don't want to have to say I'm, sober for the rest of my life. And I know part of that was my addicted brain talking, but I also, wanted to be able to have a glass of wine on a Friday night. I just wanted to have this like ideal relationship with alcohol that was a few drinks a week, control when I drank, no more hangovers, no more negative consequences linked to my drinking. And through the Sinclair method, I got there happily. Like I drank that way for probably about 6 months on the method. In the beginning, I was still drinking quite a bit, but for 6 months, I was like that normal drinker I wanted to be, which was amazing. But then the longer I was on it, I just feel like it worked better and better. And I got to this place where I quit drinking by accident, I tell people, because I went a month without drinking, then 2, 3, and 4. And after 4 months, I was like, I guess I don't care about drinking anymore. Maybe I won't drink. Like it was never this plan I had. It just kind of happened that way. I lost interest in it.
Yeah, I will say my husband said the same thing,
Really?
Because he was working just like anybody. It's like, I want to have control. I want to only do a little bit. And then he got to the extinction point. And then the longer he's gone out from extinction, it's like, it's of no interest. Like I can have a glass of wine at dinner and there's no drive to do it. Right.
Yeah.
But, the other thing that I think is very sad too is no one comes up to you and says, you want to do a line of blow or smoke some crack or, let's shoot some heroin today. But heaven forbid you don't drink at a restaurant or with your friends. It's the only drug that you don't have to defend.
Yeah, it's absolutely so true. And that's what makes it so hard to quit too, if you're struggling. Like I was in that kind of internal conflict for so long. Like it's acceptable everywhere. It's how I hang out with my friends. It's what my husband and I do on Friday nights. Or it's not that my husband was pressuring me to drink, but it's just so ingrained in our culture. And there have been times like, I'm thankful that I reached extinction and I just don't care about alcohol, but I've literally felt pressured by waiters like, really? You don't want to drink? Oh, come on, just have one. Like when I'm out to sushi, I'm like, literally no, but the pressure that is there. And I couldn't imagine if I was like white knuckling it and really trying not to drink, like that would just be like one little invitation where I'd be like, okay, sure. Why not? I'll give into it. But yeah, it's crazy. It's so pushed and accepted everywhere. And you're almost like the weirdo if you don't drink, or if you don't drink sometimes, like even people who don't want to drink every time they socialize, it's like, really? Are you sure? It's interesting.
I think that's the big driver behind abstinence. If you look at the stats and you listen to people's stories, because we make it a weakness on that person, right? You're weak-willed. And then all of our social environments. And again, as you get older, like I'm older than you are. I'm not even kidding that this is sport, right? Like,
wow.
It gets worse as we get older. Like you get the retired group, it's even worse. Yeah. And so if you're white knuckling it and you're trying to abstain, and it's really difficult because those cravings can last for years in the brain. Yeah. It's not like it's just a few months, right? And if you are, and you're having to defend it all the time, so all of a sudden what happens is that person goes, okay, I can't go out with my friends. Like my husband and I had conversations about what restaurants to go to because we were well known, right? I'm sure waiters were probably beating each other up to get to the table because it was like, woo, it's going to be a decent tab, right? And so all of a sudden you're like, okay, I'm not going to go out. I'm not going to see that friend. I don't want to hang out with that group of people because I'm going to feel compelled to want to drink and I'm white knuckling it. And so of course you're going to relapse. Of course you're going to go drink again because it's not only changing that behavior and the addiction patterns, but it's all of a sudden you're so very isolated.
Yeah, it's so true. And I heard someone say once, like, in those settings, you're alcohol free, but you're not free from the alcohol. So maybe you're not drinking, but you're creating your whole world and your whole life to still revolve around alcohol so that you can avoid people, places, circumstances, situations just to like not be triggered to drink. But as someone like me who is a daily drinker, everything was a trigger. So I remember trying to quit drinking before the Sinclair Method. They'd be like, just pay attention to your triggers and like find different ways to respond. I was like, 5 o'clock is a trigger, like Saturday's a trigger, I'm sad, it's a trigger, I'm happy. So it's just, for me, that did not work because everything was a trigger and an occasion to drink. And I was just like, how do I even like live life, outside of this? And then the cravings there. And it was such a battle. And with the Sinclair Method, it was so easy and effortless. Like, okay, I have this craving. So I take Naltrexone and I drink. And I know that by doing that, my brain is getting fixed. And like, that was so cool to just be in that place where I could drink without having a bunch of shame. And then I just saw myself drinking less. And of course, there's more to it than just the pill. Like I drank to cope, to socialize, all that. So I had to create different hobbies and other ways to cope after a stressful day. What was great with the method is it was gentle and gradual. And I could like realize, okay, I don't want to drink after a stressful day anymore. So what else can I do? And it was so much easier to try to do other things because I wasn't just fighting a craving. I genuinely didn't want to drink and I could go get a massage or go for a walk or something like that.
Yeah. And I think you bring up a good point when they say, go look at your triggers. I would say most people, I'm going to talk about how I learned to drink, right? So I was a typical Gen X. I was definitely binge drank even in high school, right? And then get to college. Actually, college, because I had to work full time, I drank less than my counterparts because I worked full time and went to school full time. But I didn't stop. So I binge drank on the weekends and then Thursday night, and then you start adding Thursday night. And then as I got older, I drank less and I stopped binge drinking. But people don't start out and go, hey, I'm going to use alcohol as the thing that's going to help make up for my anxiety, my stress, my whatever. It starts out as something you do to hang out or whatever. And then it becomes, I'm doing it to relax. Now then I'm using it because often we're having an uncomfortable feeling that we use these drugs, whether it's smoking, drinking, whatever, to even out the chemistry. Right? Mm-hmm. We're evening out the brain chemistry to some degree by causing a boost to dopamine. So people don't start with it like that, but everything is a trigger in most cases. It's brunch.
Yeah.
It's brunch on the weekend. What?
Yeah.
I can't imagine drinking at 10 a.m. I'm like,
yeah.
Oh, God.
Oh, yeah.
I was like, I'd be in bed. I'm 54. I'd be in bed by 1. I'd be like, I don't even know. No.
Yeah. Yeah. But you're right. I remember John in our interview, your husband, he mentioned like a swim up bar at a hotel, how like the bartender was like, I'll stay open for you as long as you need or whatever. But then you guys, I think he said you went back and like he didn't even care about drinking on that trip. But yeah, it starts out as something innocent and fun. Like I tell people as well, and maybe like some would disagree, but I really feel like I developed an addiction to alcohol by accident. Like I was honestly looking back, I was very naive to how addictive alcohol was. And I thought, like how society views it, the alcoholic is someone who's like under a bridge drinking whiskey out of a paper bag. Like that's never going to happen to me. But what I didn't realize that by simply repeatedly drinking happy hour most nights, bottle of wine to relax, drinking on the weekends. I love to drink in the morning. So I was one of those people like go out to breakfast and drink mimosas or Bloody Marys. But just by doing those fun, in quotes, things that are so social, I developed an addiction to alcohol. And once I realized I was addicted, I remember trying to take a week-long break. And it was so hard. I just wanted to drink every day. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is more than just a fun habit. I was just like, it started out as something that was fun that I did to socialize and all of that. But then I became hooked and it became a more and more isolating thing and something I really didn't have control over.
Yeah, I would say that, again, people they don't engage in drinking with the hope that they're going to become somebody that can't control it, which I think brings up another thing. In a lot of people's families, they may have alcohol use disorder in previous generations, right? So there is some small genetic likelihood, right? But that's relatively small. The numbers do not add up to the number of people that have alcohol use disorder for genetics. And I think that's important because I think it's also kind of like you're a victim to it. People will feel disempowered. They'll go, okay, my grandmother or my mother or my dad or somebody was an alcoholic, so I'm inevitably going to be an alcoholic. There might be a slight increased risk. Even if you don't have any alcohol use in your family, there's a risk.
Yeah, exactly. Like it can happen to anyone, regardless if that risk is there. And I do think sometimes when people have that gene, it is like, oh, well, it's inevitable. And it's in my family. So I just thought, well, this is who I'm going to be. Before I learned about the Sinclair method, I was like, I can't figure this out. I guess I'm going to struggle with alcohol my whole life. My whole family has struggled. But yeah, you're exactly right. It's a contributor, but honestly, it's more about repeatedly drinking and your brain changing. And that could happen to anyone at any age, at any point in life.
Yeah. So tell my listeners, number one, how do they find you online, like on your Facebook group? And so if you're curious about like, gosh, I need to understand this more. I need to know what to do.
Yeah. So my company is called Thrive Alcohol Recovery, and we have an online program that guides people through the Sinclair method. We can refer them to telemedicine physicians who specialize in the treatment. Like we talked about, anyone can go to their doctor with naltrexone or ask for a naltrexone prescription. You may or may not get the prescription. It just depends what your doctor knows about it. But I put out a lot of videos, interviews, success stories, expert interviews with physicians who specialize in it. And you can find us all across YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, Thrive Alcohol Recovery or thrivealcoholrecovery.com. We also have a free Facebook group called Thrive with the Sinclair Method, where that's just a place to connect with others who are using the method. But I started documenting my journey in 2017 when I went on the treatment because I was just blown away by the results. So I've been making videos on YouTube for a long time so you can see my journey. I've got tons of success stories and just informational videos. So if people want to learn more about it, we've got lots of resources on our various social medias and website as well.
Yeah. And then, like I said, there is a documentary called One Little Pill that was put together by Claudia Christensen. It's an incredible story. And also just some of the details about how this works and, you know, why it works. And again, we could have a bigger conversation about why we don't use it here in the United States, but it is a truly effective treatment, having lived with somebody that have gone through it. And my husband's story was a little different than others. It took longer for extinction. You know, he took more of it than the average person, you know, so everybody's experience of this will be a little bit different, but it absolutely works. And it's so very empowering. You know, and I would even say, I don't know if you ran into this, Katie, but I think it would be an interesting just a few minutes to have a conversation about, let's say somebody's sitting on the fence. They're like, I don't think I'm at a bottle a day. You know, I'm not at that, like where let's recognize that's a slippery slope. Okay. Yeah. Maybe I'm not there, but I'm kind of concerned about what I'm drinking, or I'd like to cut back. Yeah. You know, they could still use the Sinclair method to cut back in a way that feels very empowering because they are on that slippery downward slope. Yeah. You know.
Exactly. And that's the thing. Sometimes people ask me, oh, is my drinking bad enough for the method, or is it too bad for the method? And if you look at the research, it's actually worked for mild, moderate, and severe alcohol use disorder. And so what's really cool about this treatment is that you said if that person's drinking a few glasses of wine a night, but they can feel it's progressing, maybe they just feel that they're not at peace with their relationship with alcohol. Maybe they're anticipating that drink, watching the clock, waiting for the kids to go to bed, you know, opening that wine with dinner, you know, just these things where it's starting to have more control over us versus us having control over it. People can do the Sinclair method and they can cut back, and they can, again, it's not abstinence. It's just, okay, this is going to help me have more control, think about it less, you know, just essentially have my power back over alcohol. So someone who, I know you're in the functional medicine space, even though I was drinking so heavily, I was like all about organic food and exercise and things like that, maybe to like counteract it. But I know some people think, I don't want to take a pill for drinking. And I totally get that. That's where I was at as well. But I just encourage people to look into naltrexone. Like, it's been researched for decades. It's non-addictive. It's a pretty benign, safe medication. So for people to just look into it, because I know that thought may be daunting for some people, but just coming from someone who used it myself, like the benefits of it were just like incredible. It was kind of humbling, I think, for me to realize, okay, I'm going to use a medication, but man, did it change my life. And I'm so grateful for it. And I've heard from people who work with more functional medicine doctors or naturopaths and tend to be more of the ones that are supportive of naltrexone than their GP, which is just interesting to see as well. So yeah.
Yeah, I think it's because we understand the biochemical activity and the true, what does extinction really mean? It does not mean stopping drinking. It actually means rewiring the brain so it no longer has the alcohol craving, and distinguishes and removes some of those receptors also as those cells replicate and other things to really help somebody have true control over alcohol. Yeah, it is a crazy thing. You know, one of the things that I think is crazy is I'll have women that are terrified of doing hormone replacement, which is a whole nother conversation, or worried about perimenopause and menopause and what should I do after that? And I can't take estrogen because I'm scared of breast cancer. And I'm like, okay, you could take all the estrogen on the planet and probably not have as much risk as if you are a daily drinker for breast cancer. Alcohol consumption is by far greater risk for breast cancer than any kind of hormone replacement. And it's such a fabric of our community. It's just, it really is. And that's really what the problem is.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know, what I loved about this treatment, like I said, it was gentle. So it's like my doctor, the thing she told me is like, just start by taking the naltrexone before you drink. Like, don't force yourself to do anything else. Just drink like you normally would and take the naltrexone before. And to me, as someone who'd been like trying so hard to get this issue under control, it was just like this weight was lifted. Like, all I have to do is take this medicine. Okay. And then progressively, as I went through the treatment, of course, like I said, I was looking at other habits and things like that. But it was just such a gentle way to start the treatment and start my journey to a healthier relationship with alcohol. And I loved that about it. It wasn't this white knuckled, will-powered thing anymore. It was just, okay, I'm just going to take this pill. And just by doing that, I saw so many incredible changes.
Yeah. As somebody that's talked to our patients that have gone through and used it as well, it's like, oh yeah, I can still go with my girlfriends to brunch and I can have a glass of champagne. But guess what? I might only do one glass. I might not have 4 with my girlfriends because I have control and I don't really feel that sort of burning urge to continue to drink. And I think that, yeah, it is so very empowering. So before we go, tell my listeners one more time how to get a hold of you so they know.
Yeah. So thrivealcoholrecovery.com is the website. All of our social media is on there. I've got lots of blogs. I've got success stories, free resources you can download. And of course, we have a program as well that supports people through it. But if you search for us anywhere, even just on Google, Thrive Alcohol Recovery, you will see all of our social medias and websites and things like that.
So awesome. Awesome, Katie. Thank you so much for being on Menopause Mastery. This has been a very important conversation for me that I wanted to really get out there. And I thank you so much for joining me.
I'm honored. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody, for listening to Menopause Mastery. If this was an episode that was meaningful for you, share it with a friend, because together we rise. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Menopause Mastery podcast. You are why I'm here, and I am so very grateful. Hit subscribe so you don't miss any wisdom on creating the most exceptional life on our terms. If this episode has helped you in any way, please share it with a friend to spread the love, and together we rise. You can follow me on social media at Betty Murray, PhD, and you can reach me online at bettymurray.com.